Radio Tipping Point International.
They acted right away when the flash came. If they had been at this doorway when the bomb flashed, Paul and Patty would have ducked and covered this way, like... It's a bomb! Duck and cover! Paul and Patty know what to do. Paul covered the back of his head so that he wouldn't be burned, and Patty covered herself with the coat she was carrying. They knew how to duck and cover. They acted right away when the flash came. If they had been at this doorway when the bomb flashed, Paul and Patty would have ducked and covered this way, like this girl. Heavy doorways are a good place to duck and cover. She will be safer too. Here's Tony going to his Cub Scout meeting. Tony knows the bomb can explode any time of the year, day or night. He is ready for it. Duck and cover. Atta boy, Tony. That flash means act fast. Tony knows that it helps to get to any kind of cover. This wall was close by, so that's where he ducked and covered. Tony knew what to do. Notice how he keeps from moving or from getting up and running? He stays down until he is sure the danger is over.
We should develop a little glossary of deterrent words. I propose that neighborhood should often be read gangland. Similarly, social organization, protection, society, racket, culture, conditioning, leisure activity, protected crime, education, premeditation, Atilikotani, Situationist International Anthology. You have entered the realm of Radio Tipping Point. Boyle Mishael is my name. And we're calling this little ditty More Songs About Structure and Behavior. Have you ever noticed that this concept of alienation, that of what we are confronted with between 15 and 18 hours a day, is not a new invention. That the alienation as being the driver of a number of the subjects that we'll be talking about today in the show has a very long history. We can go very far back in the banishment of individuals from their tribe. That was continued in the form of a one-way ticket to Siberia. Don't forget prisons. And the original intention was to remove an individual from their surroundings, forcing them to be disavowed by their community. Some of us have actually relished that opportunity, but for the most part, this is a fate worse than death. And within the realm of all mod cons, all modern conveniences, when we look at the number of individuals within our community that are living on their own, then if the conditions resulting from that of what was triggered in March of 2020 was not an indicator, then inquiring minds would like to know what is. Although the individuals who are the proud owners would argue with this assessment, one can look at the car as a form of isolation. We are not together with others. We are, for the most part, all by ourselves. And with that, we have created a capsule that is to protect us from all of those nasty things that are to be found within our environment. Either on the macro field of all those unpredictable elements that are to be found within nature, to the meso field, those things that we are not quite sure about in our community, because that alienation was long established. And then on the micro level, and that would include the fear that we have of acting in a way that we didn't expect from ourselves. And our alienation capsules will be modernized in the form of autonomous vehicles, which will ensure that we will not have any contact with anyone anymore unless we freely choose to let them into our virtual capsule. So perhaps you might have noticed within those examples, starting with the accommodation of our domicile capsule to the car, our mobile capsule, that there is an underlining theme to be found within these models, and that is the idea of protection. We are protecting ourselves from our community. Goes without saying, all those things in nature that we cannot predict, well, they cause a danger. And make sure that you have your car locked at all times. And if you think about it, that protection is the ultimate form of submission, because it's based on an underlying fear that we have, one that has been developed, one that perhaps we might have inherited, and one that we continually foster.
Here are some older boys showing what to do if the flash comes when you are not in the classroom. This is what to do if you should be in a corridor. You duck and cover tight against the wall this way. Remember to keep your face and the back of your neck covered tightly. Try to fall away from windows or doors with glass in them. Then, if the glass breaks and flies through the air, it won't cut you. You might be eating your lunch when the flash comes. Duck and cover under the table. Then, if the explosion makes anything in the room fall down, it can't fall on you. Getting ready means we will all have to be able to take care of ourselves. The bomb might explode when there are no grown-ups near. Paul and Patty know this, and they're always ready to take care of themselves. Here they are on their way to school on a beautiful spring day. But no matter where they go or what they do, they always try to remember what to do if the atom bomb explodes right then.
We can be very proud of Paul and Patty, as they set examples for us in our society of how we can counteract that fear of the unknown and the damage that could take place. And the only option is being prepared at all times. The day will most likely come where we will make a revisit to these comical and antiquatedly perceived ideas of air raid shelters. If we only understood the danger that is to be found when atomic plants are to be found within a war zone. But maybe that's just a stage. Let's look at terrorism threat levels. They come in all varieties. But let's look at the 4 levels that are to be found within the U.S. model. First one being conditional. Meaning that the conditions have to be right for terrorism to come into your town. So you're probably working on your duck and cover so that you never even hit that conditional phase. But just like the description that we had going back to the 50s of the nuclear threat, they were put into 2 categories. We either had the one with advance notice, or the one that allowed us for no advance notice. So I'm not really quite sure what the difference is between the veiled and the conditional. And when I think about it, the next category, which is indirect, doesn't seem that much different either. And one could even argue that conditional, veiled, and indirect are different levels of fear. Whereas the last category, that being direct, is pretty straightforward. That means we know it's coming. And if there was one level that I suspect that most people would prefer, it would be the last one. But we don't run across that one that often. Or conversely, there are times that somebody knows, but lest we cause a panic, it's much more efficient to manage that latent fear. And then there are times when the powers that be are caught truly off guard. Because they underestimated the complexity of the systems or the structures that they have created. Do you remember Lehman Brothers, 2008? Where the Secretary of the Treasury, Paulson, who was knee-deep in the middle of that bonfire, would periodically step away from the meetings because the situation was making him violently ill. And the way he performed duck and cover was in the comfort of a laboratory receptacle. And how often do we keep hearing this phrase that seemed to become a mantra after 2008 in times like these? Our crisis, you would think this is a tape loop that keeps getting played
over and over and over and over and over and over and over
again. and the pause button is an add-on. That can only be purchased from our brave souls that pay attention and continue to follow the rules of duck and cover.
We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. Since it may be used against us, we must get ready for it, just as we are ready for many other dangers that are around us all the time. Fire is a danger. It can burn whole buildings if someone is careless. But we are ready for fires. We have a fine fire department to put out the fire, and you have fire drills in your school so you know what to do. Automobiles can be dangerous too. They sometimes cause bad accidents, but we are ready. We have safety rules that car drivers and people who are walking must obey. Now, we must be ready for a new danger, the atomic bomb. First, you have to know what happens when an atomic bomb explodes. You will know when it comes. We hope it never comes, but we must get ready. It looks something like this. There is a bright flash, brighter than the sun, brighter than anything you've ever seen. If you are not ready, and did not know what to do, it could hurt you in different ways. It could knock you down hard, or throw you against a tree or a wall. It is such a big explosion, it can smash in buildings and knock signboards over and break windows all over town. But if you duck and cover, like Bert, you will be much safer. You know how bad sunburn can feel. The atomic bomb flash could burn you worse than a terrible sunburn, especially where you're not covered. Now, you and I don't have shells to crawl into like Bert the Turtle, so we have to cover up in our own way. First, you duck, and then you cover. And very tightly, you cover the back of your neck, your face. Duck and cover underneath a table or desk or anything else close by.
You are listening to Radio Tipping Point, and our show today is titled More Songs About Structure and Behavior. And we were just reminiscing, going down terror, memory lane, understanding too well that protection is the ultimate form of submission. So in these times like this, what are our greatest hits that we seem to be playing? Well, in our safe Central European home, the mantra is inflation and the energy crisis. Sometimes we'll start with inflation and then follow up with the energy crisis, and sometimes it's the other way around. And then we have number one on the charts. Can you say pandemic? Yes, folks, do not think that we have put this old chestnut away. No, siree, bub. Within that false sense of security, we will go down memory lane and play the pandemic polka. So when we talk about this idea of structures and how they influence our behavior, well, structures come in all kinds of flavors. But there is one underlying component that for us as human beings seem to be the one that we keep clamoring for, the ones that we hold on tightly to, those ones that, if all else fails, we will always have these structures. And they are based upon this concept of consistency, meaning that we follow through with that of what we say we're going to do. And this predictability provides power to the words. And does that mean that within these structures, that what we are being told, what is going to happen, actually does happen? No, that's when the obfuscation raises its ugly head. And when we're not quite sure what was the latest message that we received, then the non-message is the ultimate message. And we continue to go on from revision to revision to revision to revision. And if you listen to the conversations that are to be found in those spaces, when we allow ourselves to be freed from our alienation capsules, the conversations will go like this. Didn't they say we were supposed to have economic growth this year? Didn't the weather person say it was supposed to be sunny today? Didn't they say this profession would guarantee my future income and ensure eternal happiness? Action, response. Action, response. Action, response. Action, response. Action. Well, we know what kind of response we're going to get. It's all tied to, one could even argue, if we were being cynical, that the situation, the spectacle, is intended to provoke behavior. So we create the spectacle, And through the conditioning that is all part of these various structures that we've been looking at so far today, that the response is such, well, we have a good idea of what we can expect. There was a book that came out about 8 years ago, perhaps a little bit longer, titled Nudge, by economist by the name of Richard Thaler. And in fact, Thaler ended up winning a Nobel Prize for economics for his work, and this idea of nudging fits quite well into the spectacle of structures in the collection of canned behaviors. Within his book, he refers to an approach or a philosophy titled libertarian paternalism. And within this idea of libertarian paternalism, the idea is that we recreate the illusion of a freedom of choice, because we know that the overtly totalitarian model will create some pushback. And if you're refined in your approach and how you manage things, you can avoid all that pushback. Because within the spectacle that we create through these structures, and if we know what kind of behavior is going to be generated, then you can save yourself a lot of agony. So within this concept of libertarian paternalism, the libertarian element refers to the conditions that allow for a choice. But knowing full well in our striving towards the ultimate convenience that we intentionally manipulate the results, and that we know that if given a choice, when people fall into the default mode, then we know what kind of choice they're actually going to make. And within this libertarian paternalism model, the paternalism meaning that we perform these actions knowing full well that those people in power, well, they know what's good for us. So let's not cause too much of a stink, okay? I knew you'd understand. Here are some examples of what libertarian paternalism is comprised of. The idea of opting in versus opting out. Let me explain these two terms to you. Opt-in means that we need to make a conscious decision to participate or to acquiesce or to simply agree. And that requires a specific effort. The effort might include reading those things that you sign, or reading the components that are tied to that checkbox or radio button to be found in that website. And if we are looking to create an environment where the freedom of choice is truly present, then the opt-in proposal or vantage point would lead to more enlightened behavior, let's put it that way. So let's move to the other side of the equation. That would be opting out, meaning that the default values will immediately come into play if indeed you do not consciously remove your agreement, which would mean that you would have to read the fine print. You would have to look at all those check boxes that you have marked. And the example that was given is tied to this idea of organ donations. And those who are familiar with the concept, especially those coming from the state of California, where the ability to donate your organs in case you pass away and the organs are still in functioning mode, there was a possibility of ensuring that your organs can automatically be passed on. And there was an interesting study that took place comparing the setup in Germany to Austria. And I'm not quite sure whether this is still applicable or not. This was a number of years ago. In Germany, the model was of an opt-in variety, meaning that if you wanted to donate your organs in case you pass away, that you had to cognitively make that choice. Whereas in Austria, it was the other way around. That if you were not able to specifically denounce that option, then the default is that your organs end up with somebody else. And the example was displayed in a way to show that we have the ability to influence behavior in a positive way in using simple tricks like this. And there's an underlying tone to be found within all of the examples of libertarian paternalism, and it's all tied to this concept that we seem to revisit quite often here on Tipping Point, and is the idea of convenience. Convenience being the driver that becomes the basis of the majority of our decisions. That we do not necessarily look at the value to be found in the choice per se, but it always seems to come down to the path of least resistance. The one that is just simply more comfortable. Because we don't want to bother. Oh, let's rephrase that one. We are completely immersed with this idea that we do not have the time to look into various options. And so the default convenient option becomes the one of preference. And so you can say that convenience has become our universal opt-out structure. What I know fills me up. It's an everlasting cup. What I believe will never change. My consolation for the night. And it all comes down to this desire, this passion, this obsession that we have tied to the idea of predictability. And we have noticed when viewing all those actions that seem to take place in times like these, that our overlying preference appears to be based upon a life with a misery component, or with a misery undertone. That would be our preference to a life of uncertainty. And that takes us back to where we started in our show today. And our sense, or that need for protection. Because we don't know how nature's going to react. We don't know how our neighbors are going to react. We don't know how we are going to react. So give me misery. Because it beats uncertainty every day of the week.
Hey, Bert, come on out and meet all these nice people, please. Oh, all right. We really can't blame you. You see, Bert is a very, very careful fellow. When there's danger, this is the way he keeps from being hurt. Sometimes it even saves his life. That's why these children are practicing to duck and cover, just as you do in your school.
More songs about structures and behaviors. And if we were only cognizant of those levers that are being pulled, either intentionally or, oh, I get it, we actually automated the process. And so those levers are actually being managed on their own. We've created programs that allow for those levers simply to be pulled. And through this journey that we have been observing today, it is safe to say that we are no longer cognizant of our actions. The only time that we are truly aware is after the fact. And so, we perform actions without thinking. No time for reflection. You do not have time for reflection. Idle hands are the devil's playground. We know this one, right? So this conditioning has been going on for a number of years, for a long time, way before you and I were dropped onto this planet, at least not in the current form. We'll leave that one perhaps for another show. But let's look at this robotic behavior. So on a macro level, we can safely say that by being absorbed by this message that is broadcast to us more than once a day, and I was going to say 5 times, but I think that's probably an understatement. That the message of fear is the ultimate control structure. But things do not just work on a macro level. Because in this so-called community, for those things that are defined, or better said, those things that we define, it doesn't include anyone who is in our close proximity because we have no clue as to who those individuals are. We live side by side, but not together. But the real trigger is to be found on the micro level. As we continue with our day-to-day activities, not quite sure of whatever objectives we expect. So we perform activities not really quite sure of what our actual values and results are. We have no idea if we're getting any closer. And even more importantly, how do we make the changes within our own routines to at least ensure a difference for ourselves? Because that does clearly lie within the realm of the power that we all possess. And there's that one underlying structure apart from fear, but very much tied to the concept of predictability, that has become our driver, our sole driver, and the driver that means that we do not have to worry about whatever spectacles are created. We know what the responses are going to be, and this is tied to this idea of the linear structure. Because from an early age, children are indoctrinated with everything becoming linear. Action, response. Action, response. Action, response. And so we get to a point that it's all tied to the predictability of that response. And when we do not get that response, then we truly struggle. That's when cognitive dissonance sets in. Because linear means predictable. Linear means efficient. Linear means progress.
Wear your linear lights, ma. Wear your linear lights, so ma. Wear your linear lights, ma. Wear your linear lights, ma.
That's right. Wear your linear like soma, because the linear is the drug that propels this juggernaut. So progress and processes, or our paths, are intertwined. And it's all tied to making sure that we know the outcome. Because there's nothing worse than watching a film when you are forced to think at the end, what did they mean? How can they come to this conclusion? I just don't understand. When I was in my mother's womb, social structures seemed a simple thing. After birth, I cursed my luck. Then went down to breakfast. And our last stop today will be the Anthropocene is the structure, because it's all based on us. And how we define progress is, of course, to our benefit. So the source of this feeling is all about us. We think that if something happens, we must have triggered it, or it has something to do with our world. But what we tend to forget, that we might very well be the recipients, but really, it has nothing to do with us. And we might think that we were the trigger, but the actual trigger was created years ago. So when people act angry, we raise the question, what did we do? When people don't talk to us, we raise the question, what did we say? When people act funny, we ask ourselves, are we the cause? And interestingly enough, and this will be my food for thought to pass on to you, give you something to mull over till we meet again. Have you ever thought that children don't have this problem until the conditioning becomes all-encompassing? And becoming an adult, does this automatically make us a rational actor? I'll let you mull over that one. We'll see you again next week.